let's talk books.
I know a lot of RVers really like reading. You like traveling out into the woods to read a good book. I know I do. So today I wanted to talk about 10 of my favorite books of all time to maybe add to your TBR or give you something to read on your next RVing adventure. Oh, don't die, Emily. Holy f***, almost died. Starting off in the number 10 spot on this list is Nevernight by Jay Kristoff. This is actually the first book in a trilogy called the Nevernight trilogy. This book is the book that got me back into reading as an adult and then simultaneously got me into reading fantasy. As we go through these books, you'll see a vast majority of them are fantasy books. That's really what tends to tickle my fancy. Nevernight is about our main character, Mia, who is going to assassin school to go learn how to kill all of the people that wronged her family. This is a big revenge plot. I learned from this series, I love revenge plots. I love angry women. This series is big and brash and over the top. It probably leans a little more YA than I would personally read now. My reading tastes tend to lean a little bit farther away from that, but this is not a book or a series that I would hand to like a 12-year-old. There's definitely like sex, drugs, and rock and roll in it. I think within like the first chapter, she kills and has sex with somebody, so not in that order. I haven't reread this series since I read it for the first time. I think partially because I just loved it so much on first read that I'm like nervous to go revisit it and maybe it doesn't live up to what I had in my mind. But I remember this series just being such a fun ride. It's got some queer characters in it, which we're trying to get more of in epic fantasy, but it's still, it can be a little few and far between. And just some really badass and awesome women, which is unfortunately also can be hard to find in epic fantasy. So if you're thinking about getting back into reading or getting back into reading fantasy and you just want something that's gonna be like a true page turner, you're gonna crank through it, recommend Nevernight. But if as you're reading it, you're like, Emily, this is like so ridiculous and over the top, yes, that was the point and part of the reason why I loved it. Speaking of over the top, it got too hot. We had to take off the sweater. Speaking of over the top, in the number 9 spot, I have Empire the Vampire, also by Jay Kristoff. In this book, we follow Gabriel de Leon, who is a vampire hunter who has been captured by vampires and is being forced to tell his life story. This book makes Nevernight look tame. This book is what I describe as like the Fast and the Furious of the fantasy genre. It jumps the shark, and then the whale, and then the zebra. It puts the gas pedal to the floor from the first chapter and then does not let up for the entire series. It is over the top and stupid at times, but that's kind of the point. It's just meant to be a fun ride. And in between these silly and over the top moments, you do get these smaller, more heartfelt tearjerker moments with Gabriel that really make you root for him, root for this world, root for this society. You want to take down the vampires, you want Gabe to win. This book is a chonker, coming in at well over 600 pages, but I just devoured this book. If you have read a lot of like very serious books, especially very serious fantasy books right now, and you just want something that is fun and doesn't take itself too seriously and you will just like be ripping through the pages, I highly recommend Empire the Vampire. I will say that I have started the second book in the Empire the Vampire series, and it's not as stupid as the first one, which made me really sad. Like, it started taking itself more seriously. I'm like, dude, that's not what I came here for. Coming in the number 8 spot, we have Plain Bad Heroines, and the first book that I actually own in physical form. I tend to be a Kindle reader. Plain Bad Heroines is an oddball book. This book jumps back and forth between telling the story of a early 1900s haunted all-girls boarding school, and then the story of the modern day movie being made about the haunted boarding school. I originally picked up this book because I thought it had this like doomed love story, that it was very gay, and that it had a lot of like fun horror elements. And believe me, it has all of that. That's what you come for. What you stay for is the fantastically witty and sarcastic narrator that tells this story. The story is told through this very sarcastic and witty third-person omniscient narrator that again becomes like another character to the book, and you get attached to this narrator despite the fact that you don't really know a ton about them except for their personality that just oozes off of the page. I also highly recommend, if you're going to pick this up, that this be something that you read in actual physical form. The narrator talks to you in this book via footnotes a lot of the time, and I just find that footnotes don't tend to come across in Kindle quite as well as they do in physical form. And then there's also beautiful marginalia throughout this book that just really would not come across if you read it on a Kindle. There's little hornets and bees that fly around in the margins. There are these beautiful drawings throughout the book that just add this sense of foreboding without being so detailed that it takes away from whatever picture you've put in your own head. These little details don't happen so often that they take away from the book, but just often enough that each time that they do, they feel beautiful and special, and like you're having a very unique reading experience that you're not going to find anywhere else. This is going to be a book that people either love or hate, and I absolutely love it. Coming in at number 7, We Ride the Storm by Devin Madison. I am on a personal quest when it comes to fantasy to find more epic fantasy series written by women that have female main characters. And this is one of the very few series I have found that fits the bill. In this book, we follow 3 main POV characters. You have a princess that is trying to obtain power in this very patriarchal society. You have an assassin who is plagued by hearing the voices of the dead that she has killed. And then finally, you have the captain of a barbarian tribe, really huge air quotes on that, who's being forced to fight in a foreign war, and he's trying to save his people and his culture. This book is so cinematic. It felt like every scene could be a movie or an Emmy Award-winning scene in a TV show. I will say this series does dip into maybe not full grimdark, but it's definitely dark. My boyfriend did read this book, and his main criticism was it felt like just bad things kept happening over and over again and nobody ever got a win. I totally disagree 100%. I was rooting for every one of our main characters in this book, and I think what is such a testament to the writing in this book is when I finally found a fantasy series that featured some really amazing women. It was actually our one male protagonist that was probably my favorite perspective out of all of them. This book is epic with a capital E, and I have the second book and I just haven't read it yet, and it's definitely on my TBR for next year. At number 6, we have Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. Foreshadowing, this is gonna be an author you're gonna see again on this list. Brandon Sanderson, if you don't know, is an author that writes very hard and crunchy magic systems, meaning you're never going to get a wizard that just shows up and waves their hands and magics away all of your problems. His magic systems have really hard and defined rules, and they feel almost like a science by the time you're done with the book, because you feel like you understand the rules of the magic system so well. And in his more complex books that are a bit thicker, you'll often even have like tables in the back of the book that are walking you through this type of material can do this type of magic to help you keep track of everything. That can make a lot of his books feel a little clinical at times if that's not your vibe, which is why it was so surprising when I picked up Tress of the Emerald Sea and it turned out to be such a cozy reading experience. This still has a very Brandon Sanderson magic system. It's based on spores. Different type of spores let you do different types of magic, but this book just feels so cozy and fun as you read it. I think in the author's notes before the story, he talks about how this is highly inspired by The Princess Bride, and he wanted to write something that had that feel, but where the Buttercup character had more agency in the story, and he nails that hook, line, and sinker. If you love The Princess Bride and want something that has a very similar vibe, but with a very different magic system, and to learn about one of the most prolific fantasy authors out there writing right now, highly recommend you pick up this book. It's got everything you could want, a very cute romance that doesn't take over the whole story, pirates, swashbuckling, characters that you just absolutely fall in love with. I absolutely love Tress of the Emerald Sea. In the number 5 spot, we have Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. If you don't know, Andy Weir is the same author that wrote The Martian, another book that I absolutely adore if you haven't picked it up. Andy Weir is an author known for writing very crunchy and hard sci-fi. What this means in the sci-fi genre is that he tends to explain the science behind what is happening as you go through the book. And where in a less deftly handled way, this could feel like you are sitting in like the world's worst physics class, instead, you feel like you're being guided through the science while also being guided through the story. You never feel lost, you never feel like you're being made dumb for not understanding something, and instead you are just taken along on this beautiful journey through his books. I absolutely loved The Martian, which they did turn into a movie. Project Hail Mary, I feel, was like Andy Weir on steroids. The science is more science-y, the characters are more lovable. He just manages to take everything that he did in The Martian and do it even better in Project Hail Mary. If you don't know anything about this book yet, don't look it up. This is one of the very few books I've ever read where I knew almost nothing going into it. I read it off of just the author alone, and I honestly think that is the best way to go about it. If you do need more of a pitch here, let me give you the basic plot for The Martian and just let you know what parts are kind of similar to Project Hail Mary. So in The Martian, you have a guy who was on an expedition to Mars, and due to a series of events, accidentally gets left behind. And so the majority of the book is him trying to survive on Mars and work with Earth to figure out if they can get him back. And in Project Hail Mary, we're following a guy out in space. He wakes up, he doesn't know why he's there, and he's trying to survive. Don't look up anything more than that. If any of that sounds interesting to you, I highly recommend picking up Project Hail Mary and giving it a whirl. I absolutely adored every second of it. This is also a great book if you are thinking of trying audiobooks or you need something to listen to on your next RV drive. Highly, highly recommend reading this one on audiobook. That's how I consumed it. And there are actually parts of this book in the audiobook that I have no idea how they came across in physical form. They play with sound in the audiobook in a really fun and interesting way, and I think this is something where you actually get more out of it reading it in the audiobook form than in physical form. So highly recommend. Coming in at number 3 is a total detour from the rest of this list. Every other book on this list is either a sci-fi, fantasy, I guess I have one horror book. Coming in at number 3, we have The Great Gatsby. I know, I'm a basic bitch. I love The Great Gatsby. This is the book that got me back into reading in high school. In high school, you are forced to read so many books that you hate, and I just got to the point that I hated reading. It's one of my biggest gripes with how we teach English to students. Why would we make them hate this hobby? Let's read things they might enjoy. And then I got to The Great Gatsby, and I was like, this is why I love reading so much. If you don't know, because I don't talk about a ton on this channel, I came to RVing and fixing RVs from the entertainment industry. My love before working on RVs was working on the tech behind the live entertainment industry. And for a good long while, I specifically concentrated on lighting design. This book feels like F. Scott Fitzgerald was a lighting designer. In every scene, he manages in a way that doesn't feel like he's taking time away from the story. It feels like it's totally integrated in. He tells you what the light is doing and just sets up these beautiful lighting shots throughout this whole book. One minute you're being lit by a single street lamp, and then the next is like by the light of the moon or the light coming off of the billboard. There's so much beautiful lighting and use of color throughout this book that is just chef's kiss. Every character seems to have a color that goes with them and like a way that they're meant to be lit. It's just beautiful. The fact that this book manages to have so much theme and use of color and light and all of this beautiful prose, and yet still get through a fantastic, compact, but intricate story in this long of a book is phenomenal. I come back to this book almost every year as a palate cleanser at some point when I'm overwhelmed by reading books that are this freaking long. I'll just throw in The Great Gatsby just to clear my brain and clear my palate, and I love it every single time. If someone could find me The Great Gatsby, but like as a fantasy series, like this short, this compact, but still so snappy and beautifully written, would be my top favorite book of all time. I somehow totally forgot to talk about my third favorite book on this list, which is a crime, because it is such an amazing story. It's called Priory of the Orange Tree, and just, this book is chef's kiss. This book is epic fantasy with all of the letters in epic capitalized. You're getting this huge conflict across an entire continent. You're getting points of view from multiple people on multiple sides of this conflict. But it does play with some elements that you don't often see in fantasy, which is really cool. You have queendoms, where it's not about these queens fighting the patriarchy or it being weird or unique that the queen is in charge. As much as I love women fighting the patriarchy and showing what they're made of, sometimes it's just kind of cool for a queen to be queen and her like fighting men not having to be the main thing going on in her life. Same thing for the queer characters in this book. There's a handful, and them being queer is not the weird, crazy thing that they need to fight throughout the book. It's just like, yeah, of course they're gay. But with all that, you still get all of those fun, exciting fantasy elements that you really want to have. You've got queendoms, you've got pirates, you've got assassins, you've got dragons. Dragons surprisingly sparse in the fantasy genre, despite what you would think. This book has got a little bit of romance, but again, doesn't take over the whole story. It's not this like angsty love triangle or will they, won't they? It's just part of the story. It fits in seamlessly. Loved it. Truly my only gripe with this book was that it wasn't made into a series and instead is just like a really long standalone. If this book was instead like a 5-book series and fleshed out even more than it is, this would sit as my hands down favorite book of all time. It's just, as a standalone, I just wanted even more, which I guess is like a fantastic critique to have of a book. I think it is insane the level and the scope that she tried to hit in one book. And I just wish she had split it up and given us even more. But yes, more Priory of the Orange Tree, please. This is what I want to see in fantasy. Coming in at number 2, we have The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. I realize, despite the fact that I've read this book probably 3 times, I don't actually own it in physical form in English. But my best friend, who knows that I love this book so much, got me it in Romanian. Let me be clear. Eu vorbesc puțin românește, dar vorbesc foarte, foarte puțin și nu vorbesc foarte bine. So ignore this cover. This is the cover you're most likely looking for when you decide that you want to fall in love with this book. The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet is such a cozy, motley crew type of story. It has a female main character, which we have discovered I love. It has themes of found family. It has beautifully written female protagonists and several other female supporting characters that all feel fully fledged out and like real people. We love to see it. And we're just following this motley crew on a spaceship as they go through the universe. There is conflict and plot does happen in this book, but that's not what you're here for. You're here in this book for the characters and for the interactions between the different characters. If you love the TV show Firefly, you will love this book. If you just need something that will pull on your heartstrings and just make you smile, this is the book for you. I loved every single member of this crew. This book made me laugh. This book made me cry. If you're a character-driven reader, if you like a book that has a romance, but it doesn't take over the whole plot and it isn't just like this angsty will they, won't they. If you like well-written women, if you like there being more than one woman and not just one woman having to like hold the mantle of all of womanhood in their one womanness. If you'd like a book that plays with gender, The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet will pull at your heartstrings. I just need more people to read this book. It is one of my favorite books of all time. It's so different from anything else in sci-fi out there right now. Pick up The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. You won't regret it.
My camera died, so we had to change locations where we could plug in.
But coming in the #1 spot is going to have to be The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. This is the guy that has the really hard, crunchy magic systems with a lot of rules. Well, if you want epic fantasy right now with like a capital E and doing big epic fantasy in the way that no other author in the world is doing it right now, you gotta look no further than the Stormlight Archive, which starts with The Way of Kings. The books in this series are chonkers. This is just the first one, comes in at just under 1,000 pages. The whole series is gonna be 10 books long. We've got the first 5 out now, which completes the first arc of the book. There's a definite ending point after book 5. If you don't know about Brandon Sanderson, he is the most prolific fantasy writer out there right now. He cranks out at least 1 book a year, and these are not small books. They're not all as big as this, but like they're all chunky fantasy books. Every single one of his series takes place on a different planet inside the same universe. So every single one of his series can be read on their own, but when you start reading all of them, you see how they're all interconnected and characters start popping up in between different series. And it starts out as little Easter eggs, but as you read more and more, you start seeing how interconnected all of these stories are. It's truly impressive how epic of a scope Brandon Sanderson is tackling. If I'm gonna be real honest, I enjoy all of his other series, but I do not love them with the same passion that I love the Stormlight Archive. This series is so big and so epic, it's hard to even begin describing what the plot is. On a very basic level, our main group of people are at war with this alien seeming race. They're sort of crab people. And we went to war with them in a vengeance pact because they assassinated somebody important. It's not a spoiler, you find that out in the prologue of this book. But within that war, we have old magic coming back that we thought was long lost, and we're figuring out why that magic is coming back and what the implications of it coming back are. Our main character for this book, if you had to pick one, there are so many POVs in this book, would have to be Kaladin, who's a surgeon who is forced to put down the scalpel and pick up the spear to fight in this war. This book feels almost like a weird family member to me at this point, and that I could point out so many things that are wrong with this book because I've read it so many times, but I just love it anyway. You are not going to go into a Brandon Sanderson book for the prose. You're not going to go into it for the most fantastically well-written women, but you are going to go into it for a magic system that is unlike anything that you're going to find in any other kind of book. You're going to go into his books for an epic scope that is just, again, beyond what any other author is even attempting to touch right now. You go especially into this series for discussions about mental health in ways that you don't often see come up in fantasy. And you especially go into Brandon Sanderson books for the endings. His beginnings are often a little slow. You just have to be along for the ride. You're gonna take in a lot of information. Obviously, there's a lot going on in this book. But once you hit about the halfway point, you hit what the fans call the Sanderlanche, where the momentum of the book just starts picking up and it just increases and increases and increases, and just propels you to the end of the book, where it just feels like every chapter you are learning something that just completely blows your mind or rips your heart out or just propels the plot forward. It's truly crazy how once you get to about the halfway point of all of these books, it just feels like the book shrinks and you just start cruising through what is a massive book. Brandon Sanderson is really being considered the Tolkien or the Robert Jordan of our time. This guy is redefining what fantasy looks like right now. And if you truly want to go down a rabbit hole of fantasy, this is such a fantastic place to start, because once you start reading the Stormlight Archive, you're going to want to read all of Brandon Sanderson's backlog, and that could take you the rest of the year. And like a bonus, you get a truly great deal on your Audible credit if you listen to these via audiobook, because one Audible credit gets you one book, no matter what the length is. And I want to say this guy is over 50 hours of audio. And by the time you get to the last book, it's well over 60 hours of audio narration. So with that one credit, you're really getting hours of entertainment. I honestly could see a world where this guy falls out of the top spot, especially if I could find a truly epic fantasy series that centers women a bit more. I would really love to see a world where this guy falls. But right now, I can't find something right now that can beat the Stormlight Archive. But those are my top 10 favorite books of all time as of right now in 2025. I can't wait to do this video next year. I am hoping that some of these books fall out of the top 10 because I have found some amazing new reads. Let me know in the comments if you are interested in reading any of these books and what book am I totally missing that you think that I would love. Happy reading, happy RVing. You got this.